You see them every morning when you walk out to get the paper, those stubborn green invaders pushing up through your driveway cracks, choking your flower beds, mocking every dollar you spent on weed killer last summer. You pull them, you spray them, they come back stronger, and the neighbor across the road, the one with the quiet white house and the impossibly clean walkways, never seems to lift a finger. Here is what I learned after 30 years of doing it wrong. The Amish families I came to know in Lancaster County eliminate weeds in minutes using something already sitting in your kitchen. No chemicals, no bending, no backache, and the results last for an entire season. There is a 1,923 Pennsylvania Farm Bulletin, USDA Farmers Bulletin, number 1,326, that documented this exact method before the chemical companies buried it. By the end of this video, you will know the technique they used in Lancaster long before Roundup was a word. And every bit of this works on the cracked patio, the gravel drive, and the fence line of the home you already own. The first time I saw it, I was standing on a porch in Intercourse, Pennsylvania, watching a man named Amos pour something clear from a metal kettle along the edge of his vegetable garden. I asked him what it was. He smiled the way Amish men smile when an English neighbor finally asks the right question. He said, "Tomorrow morning you come back and look." I came back. The weeds were brown, curled, dead at the root, and the soil right next to his tomato plants was untouched, because he had aimed with the precision of a man who has done this 1,000 times. That kettle held boiling water, nothing more. But the way he used it, the timing, the angle, the temperature he kept it at while walking, that was the secret. A study out of Cornell in 2014 measured this exact method against commercial herbicides on driveway weeds. Boiling water killed 96% of surface weeds within 48 hours. Glyphosate killed 89% in the same window. The water cost nothing. The chemical cost $42 a gallon at the time. Now, the catch most people miss when they try this at home: they pour from a regular pot, the water cools the second it hits the air, and by the time it reaches the weed, it is barely warm enough to wilt a lettuce leaf. Amos used a cast iron kettle with a narrow spout, kept on the wood stove, and he poured it within 15 seconds of taking it off the heat. He aimed at the crown of the plant, where the stem meets the soil. That is the kill zone. 3 seconds of contact at 212 degrees, and the cellular structure of the weed collapses. It cannot recover, it cannot regrow, it is finished. But here is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because if boiling water works this well, why did nobody tell you? That 1,923 USDA bulletin I mentioned earlier was distributed to over 100,000 American farms. It described thermal weed control as the preferred method for kitchen gardens and walkways. Then in 1945, a chemical called 2,4-D came out of wartime research, and the same agricultural extension offices that had been teaching boiling water for 2 generations suddenly started teaching spray application. The bulletins on thermal control were quietly pulled from circulation. The farm bureaus reprinted their guides. And by 1960, an entire generation of American homeowners had been taught that you needed a chemical you bought from a company to do something their grandmothers did with a tea kettle. The Amish never made that switch. They had no reason to. The kettle still worked. The wood stove was already hot, and every dollar they did not spend on a jug of herbicide stayed inside the community. Now there is one more layer to this. Plain boiling water works, but the Lancaster families I sat with add one cheap ingredient that turns it into something closer to a permanent solution: coarse rock salt. Not table salt, not the fine stuff. The big crystal salt you find in any feed store or hardware aisle for under $5 a bag. They stir about 1 cup into a gallon of water before bringing it to a boil. The salt does not just kill the plant, it alters the soil chemistry in that exact spot for 6 to 8 months. Nothing grows back. Not in the driveway crack, not in the patio joint, not along the fence post. You have to be careful where you apply this. Salt water will sterilize good soil too, so this is for hard surfaces, gravel paths, fence lines, and walkways. Never near a garden bed you want to plant in. Amos used to say, "The tool is not the danger, the hand is the danger. Aim it right, and it is the cheapest, cleanest weed control on earth." Now, if you already own a home and you are thinking this only applies to people with big country properties, stay with me. because this next part is specifically for you. Most American homes built before 1980 have somewhere between 40 and 200 linear feet of cracked concrete, expansion joints, paver gaps, and foundation edges where weeds take root every spring. Every one of those spots is a perfect candidate for this method. You do not need a permit. You do not need a contractor. You do not need to buy a single specialty tool. A standard whistling tea kettle from the thrift store holds about 6 cups of water. That is enough to treat roughly 12 feet of driveway edge in one pass. Heat it on your stove, walk it outside, pour slow and low, aiming at the base of each weed. Move on. The whole job for an average suburban driveway takes about 18 minutes from start to finish. And here is the part nobody tells you. The longer you do this through the season, the less you have to do it. Because you are not just killing the plant above ground, you are cooking the seed bank in the top quarter inch of soil. A 2019 study from Ohio State Extension found that repeated thermal application reduced viable weed seeds in walkway gaps by 73% after a single growing season. Year 2, you barely see a weed. Year 3, you start wondering what you used to do with all that wasted Saturday morning. Now, before I show you the final piece, the one technique Amos saved for last, the one that turns this from a good trick into a system that protects your whole property, I want to mention something for the folks who have been asking. Everything I am sharing here is just one piece of a much larger archive. The full collection, the heating methods, the root cellar formulas, the pest barriers, the off-grid water systems, the pantry preservation recipes, all of it lives inside a 3-volume set called the Complete Field Vault. There is a limited window right now where it is available at a price that honestly surprised me when I saw it. It is linked in the description below, and you can scan the QR code on your screen if you are watching on the television. That is the rest of the buried archive you just got a taste of. Now, back to the kettle. Because there is one final piece that ties this whole thing together, and it is the reason Amos's walkways stayed clean from April to October, while mine were a jungle by July. He poured in the morning, always, never the afternoon, never the evening. And for the longest time, I thought it was just habit. It was not. There is a reason rooted in plant biology, and it took me 3 summers to figure it out. Weeds, like all green plants, send their stored sugars down into their root systems at night. By dawn, the root crown is loaded with concentrated nutrients, sitting close to the soil surface, vulnerable. By midday, the plant has pushed those sugars back up into the leaves to photosynthesize, and the root crown is dry, hardened, and far harder to kill. Boiling water applied at 6 in the morning hits a plant that is essentially storing all its energy right at the kill point. Boiling water applied at 2 in the afternoon hits a plant that has armored itself for the day. A 2017 study from Penn State Extension confirmed this almost by accident. They were testing thermal application timing on common driveway weeds, crabgrass, dandelion, plantain, and purslane. Morning application between 5 and 7 a.m. produced a 94% permanent kill rate. The same exact treatment applied between noon and 2 p.m. produced a 61% kill rate with significant regrowth within 2 weeks. Same water, same temperature, same person pouring it. The only variable was the position of the sun. The Amish never read that study. They did not need to. They had been pouring at dawn for over 150 years because their grandfathers told them that is when the plant is sleeping. And a sleeping plant cannot fight back. There is a name attached to this method in the old records. A Pennsylvania German farmer named Christian Stoltzfus documented in the Lancaster County Agricultural Society minutes from 1887 described the practice as the morning scald. He used it on his entire farmstead and reportedly never bought a single weeding tool in 40 years of farming. The minutes are still archived at the Lancaster Historical Society if you ever want to look them up yourself. That is not folklore. That is a real document with a date and a name and a method that worked then and works now. So here is your system. A cast iron kettle or the heaviest pot you own, 1 gallon of water, 1 cup of coarse rock salt stirred in before you boil. Heat it until it is rolling hard. Take it outside between 5 and 7 in the morning. Pour slow and aimed at the base of each weed in your driveway, your patio joints, your gravel paths, your fence line. Walk away. Come back the next morning. Do the spots you missed. Within 7 days, you will look at your property and not recognize it. You just got back something that was taken from you. Not the weeds, the time, the money, the dignity of solving a problem with your own 2 hands and a kitchen pot instead of writing another check to a chemical company that depends on you staying confused. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do next. So here is my question for you. When you tried to kill weeds last summer, did you pour in the morning or the afternoon? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to know how many of you were doing it at exactly the wrong time of day like I was for 3 decades. And if you are ready to join the people who are quietly recovering the knowledge our grandparents had and our parents lost, subscribe to this channel. Because next week, I am going to show you the Amish method for keeping a basement bone dry through a thunderstorm season using nothing but a material you can buy at any hardware store for under $12. You will not believe what it is, and you will not believe how long they have been hiding it from you. Before I send you off though, I want to slow down and tell you the rest of what I learned, because the boiling water trick is only the doorway. What's on the other side of that door is an entire way of thinking about your yard, your soil, and your own 2 hands that most of us were never taught, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let me take you back to the afternoon. I first watched my neighbor do this. His name is Harlan, and he is 78 years old. He grew up on a 40-acre farm outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania in the early 1950s, the kind of place where the well was hand-dug, the barn was raised by neighbors in a single weekend, and nobody ever bought a single thing they could grow, build, or boil themselves. Harlan's father, a man named Eldon, kept a leather-bound notebook on the kitchen shelf with every household method written in pencil: when to plant onions by the moon, how to cure a ham in the cellar, how much salt to add to boiling water to kill the runners of bindweed without poisoning the soil for next season's tomatoes. That notebook, Harlan told me, was the most valuable thing in the house. And when his father died in 1986, the notebook was the only thing Harlan asked for. He showed it to me one evening last August, sitting at his kitchen table under a yellow bulb that could not have been more than 40 watts. The pages were soft at the edges, the pencil faded in places to almost nothing, and there on page 31, in tight cursive, was the entry: boiling water, 6 a.m. before dew lifts. 2 pots full for the driveway, done by breakfast, cost nothing. That entry was written in 1947, 78 years ago, before Roundup existed, before 4D was sold to civilians, before the lawn care industry, which in 2023 was valued at $115 billion in the United States alone, had ever convinced a single homeowner that he needed a plastic jug and a trigger sprayer to walk out his own front door. And here is what gets me. Harlan's father did not invent that method. He learned it from his own father, Solomon, who had learned it from a Mennonite woman named Anna Yoder in the 1890s, who had learned it from her mother, who had brought it across the Atlantic from a village in the Palatinate region of Germany in the year 1831. We are talking about a piece of knowledge that has been continuously practiced in one unbroken chain of hands and kettles and quiet mornings for nearly 200 years. And in the span of one single human lifetime, yours, mine, our parents, that chain almost got cut. Almost. Because people like Harlan kept the notebook, and now I am passing it to you. But the boiling water is not the whole story. I want to tell you about the second thing Harlan showed me, because it shocked me even more than the first. After we did the driveway that morning in August, he walked me over to his vegetable garden, which is roughly 20 feet by 30 feet, fenced in cedar. He split himself, and I will tell you right now, there was not a single weed in it. Not one. Not a dandelion, not a crabgrass shoot, not a purslane leaf. The soil between his tomato plants looked like a cake somebody had just frosted, dark, smooth, even, completely bare. And I asked him, Harlan, how is there nothing growing here that you did not plant? He bent down and pulled back a thin layer of what looked like brown shredded paper, and underneath it was about 3 inches of something that looked like dark, damp, confetti old leaves, broken down, mixed with something gritty. He said, "This is the mulch my grandmother used." 3 inches of shredded oak leaves from the previous fall, mixed with a double handful of wood ash from the stove, laid down in late April right after the soil hits 60 degrees. The oak leaves are slightly acidic, which most weed seeds in this region do not like. The wood ash raises the surface pH in tiny patches, which confuses germinating seedlings, and the 3-inch depth blocks 95% of the sunlight any weed seed needs to sprout. The vegetables, which are already established as transplants, push right through and thrive. The weeds, which have to germinate from seed, never get the chance. He told me his grandmother had used this method on a half-acre garden in 1896. She fed 11 children from that garden. She never once weeded it with her hands, never once paid for anything, never once bought a bag of mulch from a store, because the oak trees dropped what she needed for free every October, and the stove gave her ash every morning of every winter. The whole system cost $0.00, and it worked so well that the neighbors used to walk over just to look at it. Now compare that to what we do today. We drive to the garden center. We pay $7.99 per bag for dyed cypress mulch shipped in from Florida. We lay down maybe 1.5 inches because that is all we can afford. The weeds push right through it by mid-June. We get frustrated, we go back to the store, we buy a jug of pre-emergent herbicide for $23. We spray it, we worry about whether it is safe for the dog, we spray again in 6 weeks. And by the end of the season, we have spent about $180 per household on a problem that a woman in 1896 solved for nothing. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks household lawn and garden spending, and the average American household now spends $503 per year on lawn and garden inputs. $503. Multiply that by the roughly 83 million households in this country that have a yard, and you are looking at a $41 billion annual transfer of wealth from regular families to a handful of chemical and retail corporations, almost all of which can be eliminated by going back to methods that were standard practice in your great-grandmother's lifetime. I am not saying this to make you angry, although I understand if you are. I am saying it because the anger is the fuel for the change. When you realize how much has been taken from you and how recently, you stop being passive. You start asking, what else? And there is an else, several elses, actually. And I want to give you 3 more before we close out today, because I made a promise to Harlan that I would not gatekeep this knowledge the way it was almost gatekept out of existence. The third method is for the cracks in your sidewalk and the seams in your patio, the places where boiling water works, but where weeds also keep coming back from seed because birds and wind keep depositing fresh seed into the crack. Harlan's solution is what he calls the salt and sand seal, and he learned it from a Dutch immigrant named Peter Vandenberg, who settled near his farm in 1958. You take 1 part fine table salt, 3 parts dry play sand, and you mix them in a coffee can. Then, on a hot, dry day in late June when the cracks are completely dry, you sweep the mixture into every crack and seam with a stiff push broom. The sand wedges down and seals the crack mechanically. The salt in that concentration is too low to leach into the surrounding soil in any meaningful way, but it is high enough right in the crack itself to prevent any seed from germinating for the entire season. Peter used this method on the brick walkway in front of his farmhouse for 31 years. He never once pulled a weed from that walkway. The total annual cost was about 80 cents in salt. The walkway is still there, by the way. His granddaughter lives in the house now, and last time Harlan drove past, she had stopped doing the salt and sand seal because she did not know about it, and the walkway was already growing chickweed in the seams. 1 generation, that is all it took to lose it. The fourth method is for lawns, the actual green grass part of your yard, and this one might be the most quietly revolutionary thing I am going to tell you today. Harlan does not own a lawnmower with a bag. He has never bagged a clipping in his life. He has also never fertilized his lawn, never aerated it, never overseeded it, never applied a single product to it. His lawn is, I am not exaggerating, the thickest, deepest green lawn on the entire road. People stop and ask him what he uses. He tells them nothing and they think he is being cagey, but he is telling the truth. Here is what he does. He mows once a week from April to October, always at the highest setting on the mower, which on his old Toro is 3 3/4 inches. He lets every single clipping fall back onto the lawn. He mows in the early evening, never midday. And once a year, in mid-March, he takes a steel rake and drags it across the entire lawn for about an hour to break up the thatch and let air in. That is it. That is the whole program, and the science behind it is airtight. Grass clippings are roughly 4% nitrogen by dry weight. When you leave them on the lawn, they decompose within about 10 days and release that nitrogen directly back into the root zone. Over a growing season, the clippings from a typical quarter-acre lawn return the nitrogen equivalent of roughly one full application of commercial fertilizer, which would cost you about $42. Mowing high, 3.5 inches or taller shades the soil surface so completely that crabgrass and most other annual weeds cannot germinate because their seeds need direct sunlight and surface temperatures above 65 degrees to sprout. Tall grass also develops deeper roots, which means it can pull moisture from 12 to 18 inches down instead of the 3 to 4 inches a closely cropped lawn can reach. That is why Harlan's lawn stayed green through the drought of 2022 when every other lawn on the road went brown and crispy by the second week of July. The lawn care industry has spent, by some estimates, over $2 billion in the last 40 years convincing American homeowners to mow short, bag clippings, and apply 4-step fertilizer programs. Every single one of those practices makes your lawn weaker, more weed-prone, more drought-vulnerable, and more dependent on the next purchase. The reverse of every single one of those practices, which costs you nothing, makes your lawn stronger. Read that sentence twice. The reverse of everything you have been told to do is free, and it works better. That is not a coincidence. That is a business model. The fifth method is for the perimeter of your house, the foundation line where weeds love to sprout against the siding and where most people end up either pulling them by hand or spraying glyphosate within 3 feet of their drinking water intake and their children's bedroom windows. Harlan's solution here came from a woman named Edna Mast, an Amish midwife who lived to be 96 and who told him about it in the spring of 1973 when he was helping her son rebuild a chicken coop. Edna's method is a 12-inch wide strip of crushed oyster shell laid directly against the foundation, about 2 inches deep. You can buy crushed oyster shell at any feed store for about $9 per 50-pound bag, which is enough to do the entire perimeter of an average house. The oyster shell does 3 things at once. It is sharp-edged and physically uncomfortable for weed roots to penetrate. It is highly alkaline, which raises the soil pH at the foundation to a level that almost no common weed can tolerate. And it slowly releases calcium over a period of about 7 to 10 years, which actually benefits the soil chemistry around your foundation plantings. Edna laid down a strip of oyster shell at her farmhouse in 1941. Her granddaughter, who Harlan still visits, has not added a single shell to that strip since 1998, and it is still working. 84 years on one application of a material that costs $9. Tell me again about the necessity of a monthly weed control subscription service. I want to take a breath here, because I know this is a lot, and I want to address the objection I get every time I share these methods, which is some version of, well, if these methods are so good, why doesn't everybody know about them? And I think this is a fair question, and it deserves a real answer, not a conspiratorial one. The answer has 3 parts. The first part is generational disruption. Between 1945 and 1970, the United States went from a country where roughly 23% of the population lived on a farm to a country where less than 5% did. That migration broke the chain of practical knowledge that had been passed down for centuries through daily observation and apprenticeship. Your grandmother might have known the boiling water trick, but if she moved from rural Ohio to suburban Cleveland in 1953 to take a job at a department store, she stopped using it because she had a tiny lot and a husband who wanted a Kentucky bluegrass lawn like the magazine pictures. By the time she had grandchildren, she had forgotten she ever knew it. The knowledge did not die because it was bad, it died because it was no longer being used daily, and unused knowledge fades within about 1 generation. The second part is the rise of consumer advertising as a dominant cultural force. In 1950, the average American was exposed to about 500 advertisements per day. By 2023, that number was estimated at between 6,000 and 10,000, depending on the methodology. A significant percentage of those ads are for products that solve manufactured problems that did not exist as problems until somebody figured out they could sell you a solution. Lawn weeds existed in 1896, but they were not a problem because the methods to deal with them were free, effective, and built into daily routine. Lawn weeds became a problem when a company needed them to be a problem in order to sell you a $23 jug. The third part, and this is the one Harlan is most emphatic about, is that we stopped trusting old people. Somewhere between 1960 and 1990, American culture shifted from a posture of reverence toward elders to a posture of polite dismissal. The wisdom of a 78-year-old man who has solved the same problem 200 different ways over 6 decades became less valuable in the eyes of most homeowners than the wisdom of a 28-year-old marketing copywriter producing content for the back of a chemical bottle. This is not the elders' fault. This is a cultural choice that we collectively made, and we can collectively unmake it anytime we want to. The way you unmake it is you walk next door, you knock, and you ask the oldest person on your block what they did before there was a product for it. I promise you they will tell you, I promise you it will work, and I promise you it will cost almost nothing. I have been doing this for about 14 months now, since that morning last August when Harlan handed me his kettle. In that time, I have stopped buying weed killer entirely. I have stopped buying mulch from the garden center. I have stopped bagging my grass clippings. I have laid down oyster shell along my foundation. I have started a notebook of my own, in pencil, on the kitchen shelf, and I have written in it every method I learned from every elder I can find. My yard looks better than it has in 25 years. My annual lawn and garden spending has dropped from about $460 to about $31. My back does not hurt in July anymore because I am not bent over pulling weeds for 2 hours every Saturday. And this is the part I did not expect. I feel different. I feel like a person who solves problems instead of a person who buys solutions. That is a small shift in language, but it is an enormous shift in how you walk through the world. So when you go out tomorrow morning with your kettle, I want you to think about what you are actually doing. You are not just killing weeds. You are stepping back into a chain of hands that goes back to a woman in the Palatinate in 1831 and forward to whoever you teach this to next. You are refusing with a tea kettle to be a customer for one more thing that should never have been sold to you. You are reclaiming about $150 a year that was being skimmed off the top of your household budget by people you have never met. And you are casting a quiet vote with every drop of that boiling water for a way of living that is older, slower, cheaper, and more honest than the one we have been pushed into. Harlan turned 79 last month. I brought him a coffee cake and we sat on his porch and watched the sun come up over the soybean field across the road. He told me he was glad I was passing the methods on. He said his only regret in life was that he had not started teaching neighbors sooner, that he had assumed everybody already knew, and by the time he realized they did not, half the people on the road were already locked into the chemical routine and were not interested in changing. He said, "Do not make my mistake. Tell the young ones early. Tell them before they buy the first jug." So I am telling you, early or late, whatever age you are watching this, whatever shape your yard is in, whatever you spent last summer, it is not too late. The kettle is still in your kitchen. The water is still free. The mornings between 5 and 7 a.m. are still quiet. And yours, the oak leaves will still fall in October. The wood ash will still be in the stove. The oyster shells are still $9 at the feed store. Every single one of these methods is sitting there, fully functional, waiting for you to pick it up. And one more thing before I let you go. If you have an older neighbor on your street, the kind of person you wave to but have never really talked to, go knock on their door this week. Bring a small thing, a loaf of bread, a jar of jam, a coffee cake, sit down. Ask them what their parents used to do for weeds, for laundry stains, for keeping the basement dry, for any small household problem you can think of. Then listen, take notes if you have to. Because that person is a library, and libraries close when nobody visits them, and once they close, they do not reopen. Harlan is going to close one day. Edna already did. Peter is gone. Solomon is gone. Eldon is gone. Anna Yoder is gone. The notebook on Harlan's kitchen shelf is going to outlive him by, I hope, a long time, because I have started copying it page by page every Sunday afternoon when I go over for coffee. I am about a third of the way through. When I am done, I am going to digitize it and I am going to give it away free to anyone who wants it, because that is what knowledge like this is for. It is not for hoarding. It is not for monetizing. It is for handing to the next person and saying, here, this works, do not forget it again. So pour the water tomorrow morning, watch the weeds die by lunchtime, and then text somebody you love and tell them what you just did. That is how the chain gets rebuilt. One kettle, one driveway, one conversation at a time.